There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it wraps around your chest and makes it hard to breathe. That's what our evenings had become. We used to laugh while folding laundry or deciding what to order for takeout. But lately, I could be standing right next to Eric and still feel completely alone. He barely glanced at me anymore. And his phone? Always face down, always dead, or suddenly out of reach. The man who once couldn't stop touching me now recoiled like affection was a chore. He started coming home later and later, always with a story that sounded just a little too polished. The client wouldn't stop talking. The team had to redo everything last minute. You know how work is. But I noticed the subtle scent on his shirt, not mine, and definitely not his. Once, I caught a whiff of something sweet, like gardenias. I don't even own anything floral. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, told me I was being paranoid, that I always do this, overthink, imagine things. But deep down, I knew better. My gut was screaming. So I started paying closer attention. I noticed how he flinched whenever I walked near his phone, how quickly he changed the subject when I brought up us. Every question I asked was met with defensiveness or mockery. But here's the thing, I've been wrong about many things in life, but not this. This wasn't paranoia. This was intuition. And this time, I wasn't going to sit quietly and hope things fixed themselves. I started keeping mental notes, not out of obsession, but out of survival. Every unanswered call, every awkward pause before he answered a simple question, every night he rolled over without even saying goodnight. It wasn't just the distance. It was the way he seemed relieved when I stopped asking questions. Like my silence was his green light to keep slipping away. And maybe once upon a time I would have swallowed that discomfort just to keep the peace. But not anymore. You don't spend over a decade with someone without learning how they lie. Eric's lies were quiet. They didn't shout, they whispered. Tiny cracks in the foundation of our life together. He'd forget what excuse he used the day before. He'd misremember where he had dinner with a colleague. And when I called him out gently, he didn't explain. He attacked. Why are you always looking for something that's not there? That one hurt. Not because I believed him, but because it confirmed he didn't think I deserved the truth. I began wondering who he was texting so late at night. He claimed it was work, but who texts about spreadsheets with a smirk on their face? And that gut feeling, that deep, heavy ache in my chest, wouldn't go away. It grew with every lie he told, every touch he withheld. I didn't want to become the kind of woman who spies on her husband. But one night, lying awake while he snored beside me like nothing was wrong, I realized maybe I didn't need to catch him in the act. Maybe I could make him reveal himself. I spent the next few days watching him through a different lens, not as my husband, but as a stranger sharing my home. And what I saw broke my heart in slow, deliberate pieces. The way he smiled at his phone but barely glanced at me. How quick he was to leave the house, and how slow he was to return. I stopped asking where he was going. I already knew I wouldn't believe the answer. Instead, I started planning. Not a confrontation, not a fight. Something smarter. Something he'd never expect. He thought I was slipping away into doubt. He thought his gaslighting was working, that I was second-guessing my own instincts, twisting myself into knots trying to stay sane. But I wasn't spiraling. I was strategizing. And the more distance he created between us, the more space I had to think clearly. I didn't want revenge, not at first. I just wanted the truth. But truth, I learned, sometimes needs a little help showing its face. So one afternoon, while he was in the shower humming a tune like nothing was wrong, I did something I never imagined I would do. I drove to a convenience store 2 towns over, paid cash, and bought a burner phone. No contacts, no history. Just a blank slate, a second voice. And as I held it in my hands, one thought echoed louder than all the others. If Eric wanted to talk to another woman, then he was about to meet one. Her name was Leah. Sophisticated, but approachable. A little flirty, but not desperate. The kind of woman who made men wonder if they were special, and then let them believe they were. I spent an entire afternoon crafting her. New Gmail, LinkedIn, even a fake voice note I could send if needed. I used stock photos for her profile, but nothing too glamorous. She had to feel real. And with every tiny detail, I felt less like a wife and more like an undercover version of myself, one who didn't cry in the bathroom at 2 a.m. The first message was simple, polite, almost boring. Hi, Eric. I got your number from a mutual contact. They said you were great to talk to about new business leads. I even made sure to sprinkle in just enough professionalism to lower his guard. My hands were shaking as I hit send. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what I was doing. I wasn't just testing him. I was building the stage he'd eventually step onto, not knowing I'd be waiting in the audience. He replied in under 10 minutes. Friendly, curious, a little formal, but open. Happy to connect, always glad to help someone new in the field. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because of what it said, but because I knew he would have ignored a message like that from any real stranger. But Leah? She had his attention, and I hadn't even started yet. I let a day pass before replying, just to keep things casual, believable. Then Leah followed up, asking what kind of projects he was working on. Always curious about successful people, she added with a wink emoji. That emoji made me pause. My thumb hovered over the screen. It felt ridiculous and humiliating, in a way, to flirt with my own husband through a fake identity. But this wasn't just a game. It was a mirror, and I was holding it up to see exactly who he'd become when no one was watching. His response came faster this time, more relaxed, more personal. He talked about how hard he worked, how exhausting it all was, and how nice it was to connect with someone new who seems to get it. I knew that tone. That subtle hint of loneliness mixed with self-importance. He was fishing for sympathy. And the worst part? He didn't mention me once. Not a single word about his wife, his home, the life we'd built. It was as if I didn't even exist in his narrative anymore. That night, he came home late again. Said he grabbed drinks with a coworker, smelled faintly of whiskey and some kind of sweet perfume. He kissed me on the forehead like a dad tucking in a child, then turned over and scrolled through his phone, grinning at whatever he was reading. I knew exactly what it was. My message. Leah's message. And in that moment, I wasn't sad. I was fascinated, because now I didn't have to wonder what he'd do if another woman came along. I was watching it unfold in real time. Over the next few days, Leah got a little bolder, just enough to test the waters, a compliment here, a playful tease there. You sound like the kind of man who knows how to take charge, I wrote, feeling the bile rise in my throat. It felt dirty, manipulative, but it also felt necessary. Because the man on the other end? He didn't hesitate. He leaned in, hard. You sound interesting, he typed. Maybe we should meet up for more than just business. I stared at the screen, reading that line over and over until it burned into my brain. There it was, the confirmation I never wanted but always feared. He was open. Available, eager, and the worst part? He thought he was being clever, like he was navigating some harmless little fantasy. He had no idea that every message he sent was being collected, time-stamped, screen-recorded, and emotionally processed by the very woman he was betraying. He wasn't just talking to a stranger. He was performing for me. And every word chipped away at what little innocence I had left. I started saving everything. Not because I needed proof for anyone else, but because I needed to remember. I needed to hold on to every text, every emoji, every little betrayal that passed through his fingertips. My heartbreak began to shift. It started to harden. I no longer looked at Eric and saw my husband. I saw a man I needed to expose, and I already knew exactly how I'd do it. It's strange how quickly love can dissolve into something unrecognizable. Just weeks ago, I still clung to hope, that maybe Eric was just going through something, that maybe we'd lost our way but could find it again. But now? I looked at him across the dinner table and felt like I was dining with a stranger wearing my husband's face. He laughed at a video on his phone while I stirred my soup in silence, my other phone tucked into my pocket, buzzing gently with his latest message to Leah. The messages had taken a sharp turn. What started as subtle flirting had evolved into something darker, desire cloaked in secrecy. He sent selfies, late at night, shirtless, with captions like, "Wish you were here instead." And when Leah asked about his wife, his response was gutting. "She's distant. We're kind of in a rut. I miss feeling wanted." I read that one in bed while he lay beside me snoring softly. The irony cut so deep I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake, to shove the phone in his face, but I didn't. I wasn't finished yet. Each message he sent felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But instead of mourning, I was preparing, meticulously, quietly, the way women have always done when no one's watching. I had screenshots, recordings, timestamps. I even saved the voice note he sent Leah, saying he'd been thinking about her all day. He never said things like that to me. Not anymore. But I didn't cry. I didn't even feel hollow. What I felt was clarity. I started noticing the small cracks in his lies, how sloppy he'd gotten. He used the same excuse twice in 1 week, drinks with a client who doesn't exist. When I casually asked how Kevin was doing, he blinked, confused for just a second, then covered it with a fake laugh. "Oh, Kev's good," I nodded. Took note. It was wild, really, how comfortable he felt lying to my face while pouring his truth into a fantasy woman's inbox. But what he didn't know was that both faces were looking right back at him. And I was the only one taking notes. I couldn't unsee it anymore. The man I married had become someone I wouldn't trust to feed my dog, and that realization didn't come with fireworks or tears. It came quietly, like a door closing behind me. The love I used to feel had been replaced by something sharper, not hate, but certainty. The certainty that I deserved better, that I didn't need to beg for answers anymore, because I already had them. Typed out in emojis, selfies, and every pathetic excuse he sent to a woman he thought was waiting for him. And yet, I waited. I waited until the timing felt just right, until he was so comfortable, so sure of himself, that he wouldn't question a thing. I wanted him to believe he'd won something, that Leah was real, that he'd gotten away with it. I needed him to feel safe in the lie before I yanked the floor out from under him. And that moment, it was coming sooner than he could possibly imagine. I used to think heartbreak would feel loud, like shattered glass or a door slammed in your face, but mine was quiet, methodical. It arrived not with a scream, but with screenshots. The betrayal didn't destroy me. It stripped me down to something unrecognizable, and then rebuilt me into someone I barely knew, but finally respected. Every lie he told gave me a new piece of armor. Every message to Leah hardened me just enough to stay focused. At night, while he slept peacefully, I would lie awake and replay everything he'd written. Not because I needed more proof, I had enough to burn the house down 10 times over, but because it reminded me what I was about to do wasn't cruel. It was necessary. This wasn't about catching him. It was about confronting the version of myself that stayed silent for too long. The woman who kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. She was gone now, replaced by someone ready to finish what she started. So I drafted the message, Leah's message. "Want to meet up sometime soon?" I kept it vague on purpose. Let him be the one to push. And he did. "How about Thursday night? There's a wine bar downtown that's quiet and cozy." The ease with which he suggested it, lied to me, scheduled the whole thing while sitting 2 feet away, sealed it for me. The meeting was set, the trap was ready, and soon he'd come face to face with the woman he thought he'd fooled. I arrived at the wine bar 20 minutes early. The place was dim, elegant, quiet, just like he described in his message. I chose a booth near the back, tucked behind a curtain of shadows where I could see the entrance without being seen. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I thought I'd be a mess of nerves, shaking, maybe even crying, but I wasn't. I felt calm, steady, focused, like everything I'd carried, the confusion, the humiliation, the grief, had finally funneled into one clear, sharp point. The waiter came by. I ordered a glass of red, smiled politely, and asked to be left alone for a while. As I waited, I kept my phone on the table, open to the message thread. His latest text to Leah was right there. Can't wait to finally meet you. I stared at it, wondering if he felt a twinge of guilt, or maybe just excitement. Either way, I wasn't there for his guilt. I was there for the reveal. For the moment when the fantasy he chased would crash right into the reality he abandoned. At exactly 7:03, I saw him walk in. He paused at the entrance, smoothing the front of his shirt, adjusting his collar in the reflection of the wine fridge like he was preparing for a date. A real one. He scanned the room, phone in hand, and texted, "Here, I'm in the front." I watched him from my corner as he looked around. Eager, nervous, not a trace of hesitation. That was the man I married. That was the man I no longer recognized. I waited another 30 seconds, just to let him stew. He shifted from foot to foot, checking his phone again, his eyes flicking across the room like a teenager waiting for a secret crush. He had no idea I was already watching him, not through a screen, but with my own eyes. The irony was almost cinematic. The man who once said I was too sensitive was now nervously fixing his hair for a woman who didn't even exist. And yet, she did. Because I had become her. And tonight, he would see both versions. When I finally stood and stepped into view, I watched his whole body freeze, like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. His mouth opened, then closed. His phone slipped slightly in his hand. And for a moment, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. I walked toward him slowly, my heels clicking against the wood floor like a countdown he couldn't stop. He tried to speak, but I raised my hand, not in anger, but in dismissal. He didn't deserve words yet. Not until I was ready to deliver them. We sat. The same table he'd chosen for his little fantasy rendezvous. I didn't look angry. I wasn't crying. I was something far worse in his eyes, composed. I slid the second phone across the table, screen unlocked, the entire message history between him and Leah open for viewing. He glanced at it, then at me, then back at the phone. His face drained of color, like he'd just remembered every message at once and knew there was no spinning out of it this time. He opened his mouth again, this time to speak, but I beat him to it. Not with volume, not with rage. Just a sentence. Calm. Even. Deadly. "You said I was paranoid," I told him. Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. He flinched like the words had weight. And maybe they did. Maybe he thought I'd throw the wine in his face or make a scene or demand an apology. But I wasn't there for theatrics. I was there for clarity. For me. He sat across from me, stunned. His hands fidgeted, his lips moved without sound. I didn't ask why. I didn't care what lies he'd prepared. The beauty of the moment was that there was nothing for him to explain. Everything he'd done was right there, in that message thread. No editing, no context to twist. Just the truth, raw and digital and undeniable. And for once, he had to sit with it, with me watching, and say nothing. I stood up. I left the phone on the table. It wasn't worth keeping anymore. I had everything backed up. As I turned to walk away, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was reclaiming something I'd lost. Dignity, strength, peace. Let him sit there, surrounded by the echo of his own cowardice. Because the next step wouldn't happen in that bar. It would happen tomorrow morning, when the real consequences arrived at his door. The next morning, I woke up alone. Not because he'd left, he was still there, somewhere in the house, but because for the first time in a long while, I felt alone by choice. And I liked it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the good kind I used to save for special occasions. Today felt like one. I didn't rush, I didn't cry, I didn't wonder if I'd gone too far. I just printed the final version of the divorce papers, placed them neatly in a folder, and slid them into my tote bag. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, staring at his phone like it owed him answers. I didn't say good morning. I didn't ask if he'd slept well. I simply placed the folder on the counter, right beside his untouched coffee, and looked him in the eyes. "You'll want to sign those by Friday," I said. "My lawyer's expecting them." His mouth opened slightly, but I didn't wait for the excuse. I turned and walked out the door, not with drama, but with finality. And just before I left, I hit send on one final message, not to him, but to his boss. The same one he claimed the business contact came from. I attached the full message thread, stripped of any personal commentary. Just the facts. A simple note. You should know what kind of professional image Eric's been putting out there. No rage, no revenge fantasy, just accountability. The kind men like him never see coming, until it's already arrived. He didn't text me that day. Not once. Maybe he was stunned. Maybe he was too busy trying to explain himself to his boss or to the HR department. Or maybe, for the first time in years, he realized I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't angry. I was done. There's a difference. One wounds temporarily. The other changes everything. That silence from him? It was the loudest apology I'd ever received, and it still wasn't enough. I spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in a long time, taking care of me. I went for a walk without telling anyone where I was going. I turned my phone off. I bought myself flowers, not because I was sad, but because I deserved beauty that didn't come with conditions. Every step I took that day felt lighter. I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something. A life without lies, without explanations, without the ache of wondering if I was the problem. That night I lit a candle. Not for him. For the woman who had quietly survived everything and still managed to rise. I thought about all the nights I lost sleep over that man. All the times I blamed myself, twisted myself into knots trying to fix what he was breaking behind my back. But now, I felt clear, not healed. Not yet. But clear enough to see that peace doesn't come after closure. Sometimes peace is the closure. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. When the papers were signed and the silence between us became permanent, I just let it settle. I wasn't looking for a dramatic ending. No shouting, no last-ditch confessions. Just a man sitting in the wreckage of a life he dismantled with his own hands, and a woman walking away from the ruins with her head high. I had no revenge fantasy left in me. Only relief. The people around me noticed the change. My friends said I looked different, lighter, sharper. I didn't tell them the whole story. I didn't need to. I simply said, I figured some things out. Because how do you explain to someone that you had to become someone else to finally find yourself? That you had to break your own heart just to see how strong it really was? I didn't owe the world my pain, but I did owe myself my freedom. And in the quiet of that new beginning, I whispered the truth I had carried all along, not for him to hear, but for me to own. He fell in love with a woman who never existed, and lost the one who did.